Everybody has a story, and every story needs to be heard. On this podcast, we're talking with each member of the General Conference Leadership Council. I'm your host, Alyssa Truman, and this is ANN Profiles. I'm here today with Ronny Nalin. He is the director of the Geoscience Research Institute. Did I get your name right?
Correct.
Oh,
yes.
Good. I was like, I know where you work, but the name was the one I was a little bit more worried about. So, Geoscience Research Institute. Normally, we don't plug the departments and stuff because most people know, like if we say family ministries or children's ministries, we know what they are. Mm-hmm. But what is the Geoscience Research Institute? Because I think it's kind of like one of these hidden treasures sometimes within Adventism.
Well, I hope it's not so hidden. Our desire is to be of service to the church and to the general public in general. But basically, the Geoscience Research Institute is an institute of the General Conference. So it's sponsored by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. All the scientists who work for it are employees of the General Conference. And it is an institute that is dedicated to the understanding of the relationship of faith and science from a biblical perspective. So it has an interesting combination in that all the scientists that work for GRI, as it is known, GRI and the abbreviation, are people who are committed to a biblical understanding of origins, but at the same time are also professional in their own disciplines and scientists that have earned a PhD and so fully understand and embrace the practice of science.
Some people seem to have a contention that you can't have faith and be a scientist. You can have science, you can believe in science, but then you can't really be a Christian. Obviously, you're here and you prove that is not true because you're both a scientist and a Christian. But what are those kind of challenges that you see in your mind?
It's a deep question and a question that has engaged a lot of philosophers and trying to understand the relationship between faith and science. There are many narratives and filters that you can apply to this relationship. Sometimes it can be described as a relationship of cooperation or complementarity. For example, there is a quote that is attributed to Einstein that suggests that science without faith is lame and faith without science is blind. So that kind of encapsulates this concept that they both need each other. There are also narratives of conflict and tension. So it's not so simple. Another element that we could say is that some historians have suggested that the development of modern science as we understand it today was actually generated inside the Christian, Judeo-Christian framework in some ways, although there were great Islamic scholars as well that contributed to the development of modern science. So in some ways, the suggestion is that Christianity in itself creates that foundation, that framework that allows for the development of an interest in learning about nature and the creator that is behind nature. And so some great scientists that we all know, like Newton or Kepler, even Galileo, which is sometimes presented as the example of the clash between the church and science. Galileo was a devoted Christian. So in some ways, we see that this relationship can be positive, but we have some areas where it can generate conflict, especially in the area of historical sciences, the sciences that are trying to reconstruct what occurred in the past, like evolutionary biology or geology, history of the earth, some aspects of cosmology maybe as well. So in these areas, the tension can become more real. I would also like to add that, for example, some areas of science don't have anything to do with faith at all, can be practiced by anyone, anybody of any faith. You can be Hindu, you can be Christian, you can be Seventh-day Adventist and be an excellent chemist. So you see, in itself, science is not so contentious or an issue for faith or for religion. So that also demonstrates that in itself science can be a method to learn about nature, and can, especially experimental sciences that have practical applications, don't necessarily have a bearing on belief. But again, we come back, we cannot trivialize the issue. There are some areas where there's indeed some real tension. And those are the ones that are particularly interesting for me, and the reason probably why the Geoscience Research Institute exists.
Well, maybe we'll be able to get to them. I know you talked about historical science. We're going to move back into history, but not probably as far as our evolutionary people would want us to. We're just going to go back to when you were born.
Mm-hmm.
So probably less than, millions of years, or even 6,000, right? So you were born, and which country are you from?
I'm Italian.
Okay.
Yes.
I was going to say, you don't sound like you're probably born in America.
No. I'm Italian and Italiano. That's
Italiano.
what I am.
All right. So you were born in Italy.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about your parents and about those early childhood years where you were raised. Were you raised an Adventist? Just a little bit about that.
Yes, my family consists of myself and two sisters. I have an older sister and a younger sister.
Oh, you're a middle child?
Yes.
I'm also a middle child of three. So we're obviously very special.
Yeah,
we know
have
right?
a connection already. And my parents, well, of course, in Italy, the majority religion is Catholic, right? So it has a very deep and rooted it's deeply rooted and ingrained in the lifestyle of Italians.
In what ways?
Well, I can give you some very specific ways. For example, I used to play soccer in Italy, and the teams are local teams that are connected to the parish of the neighborhood. So my team was Gregorense from St. Gregory. It has the name of the parish, and even once a year, there would be like the time when we go for mass, with the team. There would be like the priest would kind of like have mass for the soccer team. So of course that created some kind of challenging situation for me. I wouldn't go to that mass, but just an example of how in everyday life there are situations where if you belong to a minority religion like Adventism that also has some peculiar ways of expressing your faith. For example, worshiping on Sabbath. That is something quite different and distinctive, where the majority really rests on Sunday or keeps Sunday as a day of rest. And so for me, for example, we had school on Sabbath. Everybody was going to school. And so I was not going to school on Sabbath because it was the day of rest for our family. So that created all these difficult challenges from already elementary school. Fortunately, I always found teachers that were understanding, and they would try to accommodate for some of the needs. But it forces you to think about your identity and why you're doing certain things at a very early stage. Again, I'll give you the example of soccer.
I feel like we're going to keep coming back to soccer.
The Italians are really...
Although, do we call it soccer or football?
Well, we call it calcio, so it's not a big deal for us. We can use
calcio?
Calcio, yes.
Calcio.
Yes,
okay.
Calcio. So, in an early stage, as you're young, you don't play. When you get older, you play on Sunday, right? But earlier on, the youth teams play on Saturday. And so for me, that was also another challenge. What do you do, right? Sabbath is for you a special day that you spend at church with youth activities and you dedicate to the Lord. And then now you got the soccer game that you've been training with your team through all the week for the game. And so my choice was not to play on Sabbath, right? And so it was kind of an early stage. I had to make kind of very difficult decisions about why was I doing certain things or why was I not doing certain things. Funny, I remember this instance where for the whole year I never played a game, and then they had one game that for some reason was scheduled for a Tuesday. and there was maybe a holiday or something. So I was so excited because finally I could play one game that season. And you know what happened? The other team didn't show up. So I had invited all my friends and relatives, and so just a funny
So
story.
they allowed you to be on the team,
Yes.
knowing that you still wouldn't be able to play.
My soccer team was amazing. Like, they adopted me. I have such a strong attachment. That's to say that there is a lot of heart. Italians are people of heart. And so in spite of the fact I was different in some ways, they really embraced my differences. And through the years, I became really attached to this team. All of them were invited on my wedding. We had
wow.
Yes, we had an amazing time. Yeah.
Well, I feel like we just ran ahead of the story because all of a sudden you're getting married. Last I knew you were a kid in school here. So,
yeah, but
so tell me a little bit about your mom and dad.
Yes, I think that was the origin of your question.
It's okay. We enjoyed talking about soccer too.
I started to go on a tangent about Catholicism, just to say that my parents obviously were both Catholic. So my dad grew up very Catholic, in the sense that maybe in urban areas, you have a little bit more secularization, and so you can find that there is a generic attachment to the church, but not so much practice. But my dad grew up in a very small village, so the church is really at the center of life, and so he would help with mass. He would be involved in church activities. He tells me that part of him was actually leaning towards becoming maybe a priest, or there were some aspects of religion that really interested him. And so at a certain stage in his life, when he was a teenager, he started to have some questions about faith, wanted to go deeper. And he had an uncle who actually had been one of the first Adventists in the region where I grew up, which is in the Northeast.
I was going to ask, what part of Italy? So you're at the top of the boot.
Yes, I'm from Veneto, the region where Venice is.
Okay.
I'm actually from Padua, the city of Padua, which is maybe like just 30 minutes west of Venice. So this uncle, my dad, saw this desire in my dad and started to really share with him and answer his questions. And my dad was very strongly convicted, and he actually decided that he wanted to get baptized, which was not very simple for him, and not so well accepted in his family. It was kind of like a secret baptism, to be honest. But then with time, he came out and explained. But none of his family members ever became Adventists, although I think with time they came to accept his choice. So
they accepted him, but they maintained being Catholics.
Yeah, for sure,
Okay.
for sure, yes. On the other hand, with my mom, the story is a little different because so my dad became very energized and very active in sharing this new message that for him was incredible. And one of the things that he did at the time was to be colporteuring, which is basically selling literature,
selling books door to door.
Yes.
I did it for 7 years.
Nice.
So
yeah, so you have those communicative skills, right?
it's I will tell you, there's
Yeah.
nothing like colporteuring to teach you to deal with rejection. You learn how to deal with rejection very easily. You get a very thick skin.
Yeah.
So
So my dad was doing this work and stumbled upon this family that was somehow receptive, and it was my grandpa, but my grandpa wasn't that interested in the end. But my grandpa had 4 daughters, and so there's an
I feel like I know where this is going.
There is like an interesting chemistry that begins to happen there. And so my dad fell in love with my mom, and they actually started to study the Bible, and eventually they decided to get married. But before they got married, my mom also got baptized. And so when I came into the picture, which was not long after they were married, I actually, my parents were both already in the church, and they were quite passionate about what they had received and what they had learned from Scripture. So not only did I grow up with a very dedicated family that made church an important part of their life, so consistently participating in worship and being part of the community of believers, but also treasured Scripture a lot. The Bible was considered very important in our family. And also you have to think that it was a very small group. The church was not a big church. It was a small group of believers, but that became my extended family. I grew up in a church that, to me, is like a family still today. Some of the members of that church are like uncles and aunties to me. I'm very deeply connected to a lot of these brothers and sisters, how we call them, but for me they're really almost like relatives.
The Adventist Church in Italy, is it large? Is it small? You said it's not, obviously with Catholicism, that's the predominant religion.
Yes.
But what is it like? It's
a minority religion. It's very, very small. Most people probably have barely heard about Adventism, or in Italy it's not that well known. There are some, with time things have changed. I don't know the current statistics, but I would say perhaps around 10,000 Adventists in the country on a population about 60 million. So you can see the ratio there is very small. But in some ways, there has been some growth for Adventism in Italy due to immigration. And we have received a lot of immigration from other parts of the world. It used to be that Italy was the country from which immigrants would come and go to the rest of the world. But more recently, things have changed. And so in receiving, especially in the 90s, I remember very well, early on in my life, you wouldn't see a very diverse community in Italy. It was very rare to see people from other cultures, other races. But things changed really dramatically with the fall of the Soviet bloc, basically. Okay. And so we started to have first a lot of immigration from the East, and a lot of these immigrants were part of that revival and wave in the Eastern European countries where Adventism just exploded in a short time. And so they came and they helped us grow in some ways and became part of the fabric of the Italian Adventist community. But we also had a lot of immigration from Africa. For example, I remember very well, we had a group from Ghana that was part of our local church. And for us, it was almost exotic. It was the first time we would hear this style of singing or this style of being church. And so it was incredible, So we, in our little church in Padua, we became an experiment in mingling and integration of different cultures, different styles of worship, different ways of being, all united by this common appreciation for Scripture, and also united by practical things like worshiping together on Sabbath, spending the day together, having potluck together. So those are great memories, although with this diversity also come challenges, of course.
That's one of the things I love about the Adventist Church is the fact that we are so global. And I love that you were raised in this intercultural experience, because that helps you to be able to appreciate so many different things. And you're right, there are challenges that come with it, because we have to start to learn and understand and realize that the context in which somebody learned something is different from the context that we had.
Oh, absolutely. You would be interested to know that Americans were very exotic specimens to us too. They were very treasured, like we had a military...
I will go back and tell my husband I'm exotic.
We had a military base, U.S. military base in Vicenza, which is like maybe 30 kilometers from Padua. So every now and then, somebody from the military base who was an Adventist, maybe a chaplain or a doctor, would come and visit for Sabbath because they were looking for the closest church. There weren't so many options. And so when somebody would come from there, we would have this competition, the contest within the church, who would invite them home, like we would have my dad and my mom, they were like, really, hospitality was number one. We were so excited about somebody from outside that we had a whole routine. When they would come to our home, we had a little notebook that they had to sign, and then there were certain things that we would do with them and see what their reactions were. My dad is a musician, so he would play for them, have some music played for them. Then we would take them for a tour of the city. And we, growing up as kids, we already knew all these steps, so we were kind of excited to see, let's see how they react to that. And so the Americans would always, we had this little test, when we were serving them some pasta, we would also put some bread there, right? And so bread is just there to accompany the meal, especially for the salad later, but you put it there anyway. But Americans always would take a little bit of bread and eat the pasta together with the bread. And for us, that was like hilarious, right? Pasta is already like your carbs, right? So why would you eat pasta with bread, right? So
because it tastes good. The answer is simple. Because it tastes good.
You would have fallen into the trend.
Then why would you put it out there? You're just trying to trick us, poor Americans who love our carbs. I could just say it's because your food is so good. It's your own fault. You have great bread and you have great pasta, and you're trying to make us choose between two great things.
That's right.
It's the Italians' fault.
There is one thing you can do with bread. You can clean up the tomato sauce that is left in the pot. That's allowed, that's something that mom would be upset with you if you do, but it's okay to do.
But it's acceptable.
Yeah, that's acceptable.
Good to know. I will use the bread to clean up the pot.
That's right.
It'll be a big pot and it'll be pretty full, but it'll be cleaned up. I actually have always said, I was like, I'd be a great European because I love bread. I would rather have bread than sweets any day. I appreciate a good bread. So anyways, so you were raised an Adventist. I love all these tangents because we're getting to know all sorts of fun cultural things here at the same time. So you were there Adventist schools?
Absolutely not. No, as I was telling you before, the Adventist community is really small and also scattered throughout the country. So churches, now there are churches that are maybe have 150, even 200 members. That's considered like a large church.
How big was your church?
So now Padua is considered a big church. As I was telling you, with immigration kind of grew. So I think they have maybe 150 members. But when I was growing up, we had maybe 50 members, and the youth consisted of maybe 7 or 8 people around my age. So it's a very small group to sustain something like a school, and public education is really strong and accessible. So you have to consider that also my family came from a very poor background. We didn't have many means. It was really hard. We lived in really hard conditions, and so public education is also a way to be able to afford an education. But in any case, there weren't really many options anyway.
So you went all the way through secondary school,
yes,
primary, secondary. I'm
Yes,
trying to figure out the European system
we got
here.
We have 3 separate levels where you actually switch to separate schools. So the primary school is the first 5 years. So you do 5 years of elementary. And then there's middle school, there's 3 years. And then you have high school, where you can choose.
Very American.
Yeah.
Thank you. Or maybe we took it from you. I don't know.
Yeah, the 5 years you can choose. It's a little different than in the US, where you have maybe just elective subjects. In Italy, you actually choose an emphasis. It's a completely separate school. So you have more professional schools or scientific oriented school or humanities oriented school and so on.
So did you pick science?
Interesting question. I did not. I picked.
I always find that this always, like, you guys trip me up because I
Uh-huh.
find that you guys end up in a career field that you were not planning
Yes.
on it. So
Yeah, no, I chose the humanities center
Okay.
school. It's called Liceo Classico or Classical Lyceum, and it's a really interesting school. It's considered probably the one of the top in terms of preparing you for higher education, because its program develops comparatively at the same time making connections between different subjects. So you would study ancient Greek and translate the authors, and then at the same time study philosophy of the same time period. You would study history for the same time period, history of art of the same time period. So all this network of connections would start to form. And even though it had this strong language emphasis on classic languages like Latin and Greek and philosophy and history and so on, it also had physics and math and the scientific disciplines. But it's supposed to be a school that prepares you for thinking, really, to being a thinker, and then from there, when you go to university, you can choose whichever discipline you want. So you find that a lot of Italians that have actually gone on to be scientists have not necessarily done the scientific lyceum.
route.
Yeah.
So you go away to college.
Yes.
And did you know you want to be a scientist at this point?
Good question. I knew another thing. I knew that I wanted to serve God. That's what I knew.
Why?
I think the Lord knows us personally, loves us very, very individually. He cares for us as specific individual. He's a very tender God, and he knew me since I was very little. And wow, I'm choking up. He knew me as a person, as a child, and he always had a plan for me, and I sensed that. I knew that God had a desire for me and wanted to walk with me in a special way, and I always responded to that calling. I always felt drawn to Him, and I didn't know how I could serve God, but I always felt like, Lord, I want to do something with you. I want to do something for you. And to me, there was also this very close connection between God and the church. The church, for me, the Adventist Church, of course, I had a very strong sense of identity because that was my family too, right? It wasn't just like an abstract concept or a set of theories. It was the place that had molded me. My group, my real group of friends was these kids in the church. It was a small group, but we went through Pathfinders together. We did summer camps together. The fact that there were so few of us, right? You could have these summer camps where maybe 100, 150 kids from all Italy would meet in the same place, and we would create such a strong bond and connection that we'd be friends even if we were separated. But we were looking forward to meet the following year with the same friends, and that became like a really strong place for me to grow as a person, even through summer camps, Pathfinder activities, enjoying leadership skills being developed, learning to relate to other young adults, and all these experiences. That was my family. That was my enlarged family, my upbringing. So understanding God's calling in my life was also couldn't do without involving that environment, my church, and in finding some ways of serving this community.
Do you feel like you just continued to grow in that faith journey all along, or was there any pivotal moments that like you kind of knew? You know, I think for some people, we just kind of, it's just a lifelong journey and just keeps growing richer and richer and richer and richer. And you know, there's little moments of struggle, but it's kind of like a continuous process. Where some people, it's like there's this defining moment where you know. Which one of those journeys do you feel like you had?
Well, I have had maybe both experiences, in the sense that I have had singular moments in my life where I've really felt called, or where I felt drawn towards this path of serving the Lord completely and totally. But the truth is that I never really knew what specifically I would be doing. So whereas some people have a clear idea of their mission, you know, they want to become a medical doctor, for example, from an early age, that was not my case. I had a very open field ahead of me. I did well at school. I could choose a lot of different paths, and so it wasn't something that was in my decision making process where I made the choices. It's actually a very beautiful story, because it's a story where at a certain point in my life I turned around and I looked and I saw that every single step had been providential and had been useful to make me who I was, and that was exactly the piece that had my shape, my exact shape in the whole world. I was that piece, that puzzle. And the reason why I had that particular shape was because God had helped me live through several very different experiences. And the reason why I was able to let him do that is, I believe, because I made myself available. That's what I would say to people that are searching for their mission in life or understanding their calling in life. To me, what made the difference was to always say, I am available. I know this. I know for sure that I'm ready. I want to follow you. That was clear. I had no doubt. So when you have that frame of mind, anything that comes, you're much more malleable. The Lord can really work you for the long term. If you're very set in what you want, then you will succeed and you will accomplish that. But it will be what you had set for, right? But if you stay malleable, maybe something incredible will come out in the end, because there was more time for you to be molded.
I love that. I actually want to steal that for talks for young people. I loved the idea that when you look back, you realize that you've been shaped into the perfect, like almost puzzle piece for this moment. And you have to wait for that shaping to take place, because otherwise you will not fit into where God has called you. I've never thought of it like that. And my whole life story, like when you were saying that, I was visualizing all these moments where God was refining me for the call he wanted to place on me, but I had to wait 20 years for the refining part, and he's still not done.
Yeah, that is also why your question is complicated, because obviously this is a continuous process. You're never arrived. And so the Lord always has a next chapter for you, or a new experience. So obviously there is a very definite moment for me in my life, in my career, when I received this calling to serve for the Geoscience Research Institute. That's the time when I actually looked backward, and that was the jolt where I said, wow, that's
it all makes sense.
Yeah. So, but that doesn't mean that once I arrived there, the journey was over. No,
you have arrived.
Yeah, no,
nothing else left in life.
The journey just keeps going. Yes.
So let's talk about your college years a little bit. You go off to college. Are you at home, or do you have to travel to where you are?
So it's a little different again in Italy. Here you have the concept of college, which is more or less like a still neutral type of education where you're learning about general skills. Maybe you may have an emphasis, but you haven't chosen your profession. For us, you go to the university straight after high school. So you do have to choose what your career will be and what your emphasis will be. You want to go to medical school, or you want to go to be a geologist like me, or you want to become
I was wondering what
yes,
you became, a geologist.
yes. So basically that was a really interesting time in my life, because coming out with all these possibilities, I could choose between many things, and not having a clear sense of where I needed to be or wanted to go. There were many different paths that I considered. I considered doing classical studies like ancient Greek. Maybe I thought I could become a scholar that studies the original text. I considered doing psychology. Maybe I could be somebody who helps with mental health issues. I considered becoming a pastor. And you know what the funny thing is? It was actually, I did go for a couple of weeks to the seminary there in Italy just at the beginning, just to begin the journey. But it was my dad who discouraged me. He said, no, first you get a degree, and then you can go and become a pastor if you want, but I want you to first get a degree. So he was, at the time I was really, that seemed very strong to me, but I actually thank him for that, because I was so young. Imagine, 17, 18. Maybe I would have completed the studies and then quickly, and then at 21, now I have to face the difficulties of the life of a pastor. I'm thinking, wow, that was good counsel. Maturity is important in some ways. Another thing that I considered at the time was, and there is where geology comes, and everybody was kind of surprised about it. Because I wasn't like one of these kids that had the mineral collections or the fossil collections.
I was going to ask you, so why geology?
Yeah. So I was, first of all, I was very attracted by the outdoor component. There was a very strong component of the study of rock formations and rocks. There were classes that were basically mapping camps, or I like this outdoor component in terms of learning about nature in nature itself. And the second, so that came to me probably from pathfinders, and also Padua is in the plain, but is not too far from the mountains. So every now and then with my families, we would go to the mountains to spend the day there. My dad is an oboe player, so he would play in the forest, and I would just build like maybe something like a hut, or with sticks and stones, or like climb a little bit. But I wasn't like a climber or anything like that. No, speleologist, nothing. But I just enjoy that contact with rocks and nature.
So I have to ask, do you have the Rocks and Minerals honor?
Oh yeah, of course I
just
did.
had to make sure.
Of course.
If you didn't, we'll give it to you. I'm pretty sure you've earned it at this point.
I had the naturalist master, the big one.
The big white one, because you had at least 7. Yeah, I have it as well.
Yeah, I had, through Pathfinders, I was pretty nerdy, like I had the plants, the birds, I really like the classifications. And
see,
so
we get along very well also
nice.
in pathfindering.
Yes.
So you go to school to be a geologist.
Yeah, I forgot to tell you that the other element, so one was the outdoor component, but the other element, I was already intrigued and interested about this concept of origins. I remember there was a scientist that came and visited our church and talked to us, interestingly, about the Yellowstone fossil forest, which was something that GRI had done some work on at the time. And I was really intrigued. And I had been reading some books about this controversy about evolution and the challenges that it brings from a creationist perspective. And so at that time, really, my question was, how is it possible, that people don't really accept the concept of God as creator? I need to go to the university and study the secular model, and then I can... this was so naive on my part, but that was my thinking, like, I'm gonna learn and then I will show them that's wrong, right? It was like, I'll solve all the problems. I'll study, learn, and then I'll show them, because
nobody else has been able to figure out how to do this, but you can do
it. So that was kind of like my mindset. I said, I'm intrigued. I really want to study these disciplines more and learn about evolution, so that then I can show that it doesn't make any sense, right? That was my frame of mind. And boy, when I started the geology program, it was really like a shock in some ways. First of all, I felt like, do I really belong here? Because a lot of my classmates were really already into some mineralogy or paleontology or geology, or some of them were speleology, some of them were climbers, and like I don't have all these special skills, right? And
But you did have the rocks and minerals honor.
Yeah, I did.
So there you go.
No, thank you for
You're good. You're in good company.
Yeah. So, and also coming from the classical lyceum, they had taken some math class already that I hadn't taken, like advanced calculus. I hadn't taken it in high school. So for them at the beginning was kind of simpler, and I had to really close that gap. But then when I closed that gap, I'm telling you, a lot of my friends didn't continue, but I really started to get in, and I felt like I really belong here, and I'm so excited about that. The second shock was learning the complexity of the geologic record. I had zero idea, and most people have zero idea about the geologic record. They just see rocks and they think, okay, it's a rock, right? But I remember,
guilty.
I remember seeing, we had this aula magna, is like the great hall where the big classes would be held, and there was like a poster that went from the top to the bottom of that high wall with all the stratigraphic subdivision of the geologic column with all their names, and then the subdivision of the subdivisions, each one with its name. And I had never heard of some of these names, never seen these names. Like, where does this come from? Like, how did people create this framework? It's so complex. And so with time, I discovered incredible things, like things that I had no knowledge of. I remember the micropaleontology class. Wow, that would be something that I would recommend for everybody to do. There are some mud rocks, really. These are just, you think it's just a piece of clay looking thing, right? And these were formed in a marine environment, but now they've been uplifted, so they are, you can collect them maybe sometimes by the side of the road if it's the right formation. And then you take that chunk of mudstone and you wash it and you sieve it. And then when you put it under the microscope, there is this incredible wealth of microscopic fossils, microfossils. They are forams, like foraminifera, for example, have these tests, are called, they're not called shells, but tests. The tests that have ornamentations that are so interesting, and they have chambers that are organized in different ways so that you can...
I can tell you love geology.
Oh, well, but it's a revelation. Like, you would never know that inside that chunk of mudstone, there is that wealth of beautiful, incredible microfossils. And so when you discover something like that, it's a new world that opens up to you. And I had several of these experiences. I remember seeing my first dinosaur footprints in a rock surface, right? And now for the first time, I'm actually there. I'm actually touching the footprint, and that makes you think, okay, this animal was moving here at some time. And so
my parents live in Moab, Utah. And I remember the first time my dad took me up into, I believe it was the LaSalle Mountains, and I saw dinosaur footprints for the first time. It blew me away because, like, we know that they existed.
Yes.
We do not think dinosaurs existed. But to see their footprint, it's like, no, they really existed. It's like before this, like, okay, they existed. But they're not Barney the dinosaur. They're like these real beasts that lived.
Yes.
And it's totally fascinating.
Yes.
But so you go to school for geology. In the beginning, it's a little bit of a challenge. It gets easier the more you fall in love with it.
Yes.
And so what do you do after you graduate?
Well, so part of the journey, for example, I did the first there, instead of having like bachelor and master, we have these 5 years. At my time, we had this 3+2, but it was 1 degree only. It wasn't split in 2 parts. And this part, I also did some of it in England, for example. I felt like I really need to improve my English skills. I wasn't really fluent in speaking English. So here's another of the little providential pieces, right? So I went to the University of Leicester and we had an exchange program where you could take your classes in another European university and they would be accredited back to your own university. So I spent 6 months there, learned English in the process. And when I came back, this was still doing my master level, basically. I was invited by another set of providential circumstances to do some field work as an assistant for one of the GRI scientists, who is now my colleague.
Who is that?
It's Dr. Raul Esperante. And so he was working at the time with the study of some fossil whales in Peru. And I was able to join him for about 2 weeks, 2 weeks and a half. And there were also other Adventist scientists, scholars in the area, Dr. Brand, Dr. Chadwick, which I didn't know before. And so this was another very pivotal experience, the mentoring that they were able to provide. I started to learn, okay, there are scientists that are engaged in this type of work, that are asking the same types of questions that I'm asking myself. So I felt much less lonely first. And also it was at the right time, because I had just learned to express myself in English. And so now I could communicate and could get to know them, and we could exchange some ideas. And
how did they find out about you?
Another really
because you're just a student in Italy, and you're not at an Adventist university.
Yeah. So as I told you, like the Italian union is not that large, right? And I'd always been involved in activities for youth, young adults, and so the leadership of the union, the leadership of the church was aware of my desire to serve in some ways. And they knew that I had also told them, maybe when I finished these studies, I don't know what I will do. I could perhaps go to seminary. So they had conversations with me. And at that time, the president of the union was a graduate of Loma Linda University in a completely unrelated area, marriage and family therapy. But he went back for a conference, and he had the vision of a true leader, of trying to mentor, and said, I need to connect this young student with this institution that does similar work. So he went to visit the GRI, and he told them about my existence. And I wasn't there, but my colleague, Dr. Esperante, tells me that he was very shocked by this, because it's the first leader that I see that is actually proactively trying to encourage a young adult. I
actually was going to say, this is a testimony to what leadership should be doing. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that he knew what you were interested in, that you want to serve. There are so many young people who are in our churches and they're in our schools, and it's not just their teachers who can be recommending them. Mm-hmm. And it's other spiritual leaders in life. Mm-hmm. And maybe you didn't even hang out with this man that much, but when we know what interests our young people have in life, it allows us to be able to help connect them and to start creating these networks for them, to be able to use their skills for the church, because you probably would not have known how to have gotten in there. And I think that's a testimony to what we need to be doing as leaders. We need to be finding other young people who are in these similar circumstances and finding ways to let them know that their skills can be used for God, they can be used for the church, and used for mission. Mm-hmm. Anyway, sorry, I had to say, because I've never heard that. Mm-hmm. Maybe once or twice, but this is a very rare thing to hear. And it's beautiful.
I have to say that, in the course of years, I've met other leaders that have this mindset. So this is not a criticism of leaders on my part. Nope. It was just at that time, some of my colleagues had different experiences with leaderships where maybe the means were there were less financial means or a more hierarchical understanding of structure and power. So rather than encouraging someone at the bottom, they would rather support somebody at the top of the food chain. So it was so different that they were quite impressed and said, we have to do something for this person. And so that gave me that opportunity. And I am really excited to say that at GRI today, we fully embrace that philosophy. Like we actively mentor so many young students. Each one of us at GRI is a mentor to several students. We bring them with us in the field. We try to we're always on the lookout.
You almost make me want to go back to school to be a geologist.
Well,
almost
everywhere we go, we always look out for Adventist scientists or Adventist young adults who are engaged with science and have a desire to serve the Lord. That combination is so powerful, and we are always on the lookout for them, and we try to organize events for them as well.
So if a young person is listening to this, or their parent maybe is listening to this, I want to kind of like put this out there. What would be a way for them to try to connect their young people with you?
Well, of course, they can try to write an email to the GRI and with a little explanation of where they are at in their academic journey. Connect. We also have some branch offices. GRI has branch offices in 4 divisions.
Where are they?
South American Division, Inter-American Division, Inter-European Division, and NSD. So these 4 are the ones that you could connect with your branch office director. So those are the 2 options.
Okay. I just wanted to put it out there because it's an awesome opportunity to know that there are people who are wanting to mentor and inspire young people because they themselves had it. So you graduate. You've been able to spend this time in the field with some of them. Where do you go when you graduate?
So when I graduated, again, the path wasn't so clear at the moment, right? I have my geology degree, but I could choose to continue in the academic career and go for a PhD, or switch, find some other ways to serve the church. So what I actually did, I finished in July, and the PhD programs wouldn't start until January of the following year. So I went to the theological seminary in Italy, and I did 2 quarters there while I was applying to 2 different universities. And so one of them was actually in Florence, where the theological seminary is, and the other one was in my hometown, Padova. And so I said, Lord, if I get in Florence, maybe I can try to do both. But if I don't get in, then I'll just do the other one. So I actually did get accepted in both, but one with scholarship, one without scholarship. So I went to the one in Padua that had the scholarship, and I started my PhD program in geology. And more I got excited about what I was studying. I am a sedimentary geologist. I'm passionate about sedimentary rocks, layered rocks. Because we have many different kind of geologists. I'm
listening to you, and I can see your passion.
Oh, yeah.
It's like so obvious. And I realized, I wonder if this is what it's like when I talk to my parents or somebody about social media, because it's like something that maybe they're not really familiar with, but it's like they can tell I'm excited. So you're excited, but you don't really get why you're excited for them.
I am really excited about sedimentary geology. There is so much... it's like unlocking mysteries, and there is a tangible component to it. You're studying a physical record of things that have occurred in the past. It's not something imaginary. Mm-hmm. So you're engaging your conceptual component in terms of recreating. You have to recreate a sequence of events, but you're also engaging with physical reality. So there's a whole lab component, experimental component, field component, and it's a beautiful mixture, and engages you holistically. So yeah, that was I enrolled in the PhD program, and this time I spent part of my PhD in New Zealand. I also wanted to broaden my perspectives, and so I did a semester in New Zealand as part of my PhD. And when I completed the PhD, there maybe a very important detail too. That's the time when I actually got engaged with my wife. So I wasn't married yet, but when
And
I
what is
came,
your wife's name?
Elisa.
Okay.
Yeah, when I came back from New Zealand, that's when it was time to commit.
You had committed to geology. Now it's time to commit to her.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. So at that time, typically when you get a doctorate, it's already a first step into an academic career. And for the way in which the Italian system worked at the time, I was thinking that could be my calling. Maybe that was the way God had thought I could serve, by being a professional in academia, but also being very involved with church and faith, and maybe finding ways to connect and being a positive influence in the academic environment. But at the same, so I applied for a postdoc and got the postdoc approved. But at the same time, I had kept these connections with these friends from GRI and with the other scientists that I had known, and they weren't very deep in the sense that we would communicate via email every now and then. But they were aware of my existence, and they knew we had met personally, and so that was the time in which there was an opening at GRI because somebody retired, and they were looking for a candidate to fill that position. Somebody who could obviously needed to have a PhD in earth sciences or in natural sciences, but also was very committed to the beliefs of the church in terms of understanding origins, and was also excited about sharing, had ability in terms of engaging with youth, and could communicate a message in written or oral form. So interestingly, that was the time where they decided that I could be one of the people that they would interview. So that was the moment where I was facing that big split in the road, right? And on one side, I could continue my path in academia and be of influence there, and on the other side, I could respond to this call. Now you might think, wow, and a lot of places around the world, wow, a call from the United States. To be honest, I couldn't care less about the United States.
Yeah, that's what I find most Europeans actually say.
Yeah, I mean, I had all my life was there in Italy, my family system, all my friends. Like, I didn't have a desire or a need to emigrate somewhere else. So there wasn't an attraction in that sense at all. In fact, I was really concerned. I thought, Elisa will never want to do this, never. It's a disaster. So I don't know. And so when I opened the news to her, it was incredible how she said, well, if you think this is the way God is calling you to be, and we should go, we should follow. I was so taken aback by that it is like a milestone in our relationship, the way in which she was so open to something so radical was a foundation of our commitment for the rest of our lives. But anyway, that was one element. The other element was what I described at the beginning. That was the moment in which I turned around, and it was so clear, everything. The Lord had given me the ability to develop interpersonal skills, develop the ability to be a leader for youth, develop the ability to speak English. He had trained me in humanities. The work I'm doing, there's so much philosophy in it. It's not just science. You have to understand an argument. You have to be able to construct an argument. He gave me a little bit of deep into theology, taking some study in the seminary. All these little components at the right time, and with the right connections, and with the right rounded preparation for being a positive contribution in this area, that I did not have a doubt it was so clear at that moment, even though I was quite deep into the possibility of going and continuing with academia. And it was very hard for me to tell my mentor, my professor, my esteemed professor. We had worked so much together, and to say I'm terminating this pathway, that was kind of like an emotional moment. But I also felt very, very much called about this new adventure. And sure enough, that was the time in which I say, incredible. The Lord is calling me to be a geologist who is working for the church. I mean, I'm serving the church like I always wanted to, in the capacity of a geologist. How many positions like that are there in the world?
Not a lot.
Very, very few. And so,
what year was this?
Well, we moved eventually to the United States in 2007. But
Okay.
the calling was a little bit earlier. We came to do an interview in 2006, visited the place. And again, I was really worried about, what will Alyssa think about this place? And she loved it. I was like, what? You really liked it so much? Okay. So for some reasons, everything seemed to fit even Alyssa was in the right state of mind. Although I can tell you very openly that once we immigrated, it was really, really hard for us to adjust. It was a complete transplant, like we left
What were
beyond.
the biggest challenges?
Social challenges, social cultural challenges. Our way of connecting with people, our way of being together with people was very, very different. And so our emotional support system was not there. So we felt extremely lonely. The loneliness was really hard.
So how many years were you called as an associate director?
Yes. No. We don't have.
What are those structures called there?
We have a director,
Okay.
and then we have scientists.
Okay, so you were called as a scientist.
Yeah, I was an associate research scientist. Yes.
Okay. So how many years did you serve in that position before you were called to where you currently are now?
So I served in that position for, I'm not sure about the exact number of years, but I would say about 10. And then for maybe 2 years, I served as a deputy director. And then starting from 2020, I have acted as director.
So because we need to wrap it up here. But I wanted to ask if you could say something to a young person who loves science, and maybe they hear these struggles. Maybe they're in a public school system. Maybe they themselves are having a little bit of a crisis of faith because they're trying to see how this aligns. What words of encouragement or wisdom would you like to give to this young person?
I would like to say, what you are going through, God knows, God understands you. It's not just on your shoulder. These are issues that are big, very big, and you don't have to bear the burden just on your shoulders. And the Lord is with you. The Lord will accompany you, and the Lord has a plan for you. He is interested in using you. We need people who have deep commitment to Scripture, deep commitment. They can acknowledge that God is the creator, but at the same time, they treasure science. They understand the beauty of science. They want to find ways in which we can advance our understanding and knowledge of the world. That combination is very much needed. So don't be discouraged. Continue the journey, and the Lord has a plan for you.
Thank you so much, Ronny. Thank you for being here. I was very excited because you don't come out to Maryland that often because your base is actually Loma Linda. So even though you work as a general conference employee, you're not based here. No. So it's really rare that you're here. So when I knew you were here, I was like, I need to get him, because it's like twice a year we might see you here. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me here.
Thank you for
I
this
really appreciate it.
Yes.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of A&N Profiles with my special guest, Ronny. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast or the YouTube channel, wherever it is you're tuning in from today. We don't want you to miss any future episodes. Thank you for spending this time with us. Join me next week as I continue to get to know the life stories of more inspiring people.